Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. In this video, we're sharing 3 absolutely disturbing stories from people who were in the Appalachian Mountains during the first week of November. That time right after Halloween, when the air turns cold and the woods start to feel genuinely gloomy. There's something about that shift, when the nights grow longer and the silence in the forest feels heavier. In my opinion, these stories capture that feeling perfectly. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised. Alright, so I guess this is my turn to finally talk about what happened out there. I've kept quiet for years, partly because I didn't think anyone would believe me, and partly because I didn't want to believe it myself. But the truth is, something went down in those Appalachian woods that still messes with my head every damn day. And it wasn't ghosts, or creatures, or anything supernatural. This was human, and absolutely terrifying. It was early November of 2019. The air had that sharp bite that makes your lungs sting a little when you breathe in too deep. The trees were half bare, the leaves on the ground damp and sticking to my boots, and the sky had that gray look it gets right before winter takes over for good. I'd just gotten out of a rough breakup and needed to clear my head. I'd been hiking most of my life. Grew up in Virginia, not far from Shenandoah, and I figured a few days alone in the mountains would do me good. No phone service, no noise, and no people. Just me, the trees, and some peace. Or that's what I thought I was getting myself into. I'd done several trails in those mountains before and never had any major problems. Of course, I'd run into the occasional creep, or those people who were clearly under the influence of something. But nothing serious. The first 2 days were fine. The ground was slightly wetter, and therefore more challenging than it would have been if I'd done this in the summer, but still manageable. Cold, quiet, but fine. The kind of quiet that makes you feel small but calm, you know? I had my little tent, my gear, food packed for 5 days. I set up camp near this old fire tower that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. The steps were half rotted, and someone had carved words into the railings. Random names and dates, the usual graffiti you find out there. But one carving stood out. It just said, "We watched you sleep." I remember thinking it was creepy, sure, but figured it was some dumb joke left by teenagers. Sometime around 2 a.m., I woke up to what sounded like footsteps outside my tent. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon rummaging through my food bag. The wind was light, just enough to make the trees creak. I reached for my flashlight, but before I could unzip the tent, the sound stopped and it was dead quiet again. Not even the wind made a sound. That silence hit hard. Anyone who's been deep in the woods knows that feeling. Something's off. I stayed still for a long time, listening. But after several long minutes with nothing happening, I went back to sleep. The next morning, frost covered everything and my food bag was gone. Not torn up, not dragged off, just gone. Rope cut clean. Whoever took it knew what they were doing. I found a few bare footprints in the dirt near the tree where I'd hung it. Small ones, and another set that looked bigger and wider. It was annoying, sure, but I wouldn't say it was terrifying. I mean, yeah. It's always unsettling knowing someone got close enough to your camp while you were asleep, especially if they stole food. But it wasn't exactly uncommon. It had happened to me a few times before, so I didn't freak out. I had extra energy bars and sealed stuff packed in another bag anyway. I always came prepared for that kind of thing. By mid-afternoon, I started hearing movement off the trail. The kind of sound that's not constant, but just enough to let you know you're not alone. A branch breaking, a soft rustle, like someone taking a careful step. The light was fading early, the way it does in November. That weird in-between where it feels like night even though it's only 4 o'clock. I tried to shrug it off, but then I noticed something else. Pieces of my gear, stuff I hadn't even unpacked yet, were missing when I set up camp that night. A small knife, my backup lighter, even my headlamp. Just gone. Could it be that they hadn't only stolen my food? The only time of day I'd set my things down had been by a creek to cool my hands and neck. At that time, I'd heard a noise nearby, but when I looked toward where my stuff was, I didn't see anyone. Still, my gut told me that the theft the night before hadn't been an isolated thing. I'd heard footsteps around me, small noises, and together it painted a picture that I was being followed. Even without concrete proof, our instincts often know what they're doing. Even when our brain tries to come up with logical explanations, instinct exists for a reason. When you're in the middle of nowhere, you need to listen to it. That night, I barely slept. The cold made my breath fog up inside the tent, and every sound felt amplified. I kept telling myself I'd hike out the next morning, cut the trip short, call it what it was, a bad vibe. But before sunrise, I woke up again. This time, I wasn't alone. I could hear breathing. Slow, steady breathing, just outside the tent. I didn't move, didn't even dare to blink. The breathing stopped after maybe 10 seconds, and then I heard someone whisper something that sounded like, "Don't look." When I finally worked up the nerve to unzip the tent, there was no one there. But on the ground, right outside the flap, was my knife, stuck blade first into the dirt, the same one that had gone missing the day before. I couldn't make sense of it. Had they regretted it and come to return things? Or maybe one of them had changed their mind. I really can't find any meaning in what I saw that morning. All I know is that I packed up in under 10 minutes and started hiking out. I didn't eat, didn't stop for water. I just wanted out. The cold morning air burned my lungs as I climbed uphill, but I didn't care. Every sound behind me felt like footsteps. Every gust of wind sounded like someone breathing down my neck. And the feeling of being followed never left. I know a big part of it could have been just in my head, but I've always preferred to play it safe, so I just kept walking. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of movement through the trees. Always behind me, always at a distance. Once, I turned around fast enough to see someone duck behind a tree. That's when I got confirmation that it wasn't in my head. I saw him. I was being followed by a man. I just told him not to come any closer, that I was armed, and I kept walking. Now at a much faster pace than before. Around noon, I reached a section of trail where it split in two. Left toward the ridge, right toward the main road. The signpost was missing, but I remembered my map well enough to know which way was out. As I stood there catching my breath, I saw something that still gives me chills. Hanging from a branch right above the trail marker was my food bag, the same one that had been stolen. Clean, tied back up, like it was being returned. I didn't even touch it. I didn't want to know what was inside, or how they'd gotten that far ahead of me to hang it there. Just like that morning, it didn't make any sense. They were clearly having fun with me. My only hope was that this fun would stay that way, and not turn into something much worse and more frightening. Then, from far away, I heard someone say, "Run," and I ran. I knew that word was meant for me, and I knew I was being hunted. I ran until I couldn't anymore. Only then did I stop to catch my breath, then kept going. By the time I reached the parking lot hours later, the sun was already setting. The air had that biting cold that creeps into your bones. I was shaking so bad I could barely start my car. I filed a report that night with the local sheriff. They took it seriously at first, asked me a bunch of questions, checked the lot, the trailhead, everything. A week later, the deputy called me back and said there was no evidence of criminal activity. They said if they got any other reports like mine, or if any lead came up, they'd let me know. Honestly, it didn't seem like one of those cases where they just didn't care. It seemed like they were genuinely interested and really tried to help me. But whoever had followed me in the forest knew what they were doing and knew how to leave no trace. That was the last I heard from them. It's been 6 years now, and I haven't been back to those mountains. I still hike, but never alone. And sometimes, when I'm out in the woods, I get that same eerie silence again. That same feeling that something's just out of sight. And yes, it's a dramatic thing to say. But that doesn't make it any less real for someone who went through what I feel I went through. I moved to a small house in West Virginia more than 15 years ago. Back then, I was quiet, introverted, the kind of guy who preferred silence and space over people. I'd grown up with my grandparents, helping them on their farm, and hard work never bothered me. If anything, it gave me a sense of peace. At that time, buying my own property wasn't even close to possible. So when an opportunity came up, I took it right away. A couple who owned a massive farm was looking for someone to manage the daily work. Feeding the animals, maintaining the land, keeping things running. In exchange, they offered me a place to live, a converted storage building on the edge of their property, plus a decent paycheck. It sounded like the perfect setup. I could save money, live quietly, and learn even more about running a farm. The couple seemed kind enough at first. A little odd, yes, but polite. The farm was huge, so even though I technically worked for them, I could go days without seeing either of them. For the first 2 years, things went smoothly. I did my work, got paid, and minded my business. But the truth is, from the moment I met them, something didn't sit right with me. It wasn't anything obvious, just a strange feeling that lingered in the air whenever I was near them. I almost turned down the job because of it. Fast forward 2 years, and I was living what most people would call a simple, peaceful life. Until one night, everything changed. I've always been into reading real-life crime stories and strange personal accounts on Reddit. I don't know why, but there's something about reading other people's experiences that pulls me in. One evening, I came across a post that caught my attention. The person described a situation eerily similar to mine. They talked about living on a farm, working for a couple who behaved oddly, and staying in a converted outbuilding. It was so close to my own life that I couldn't stop reading. Then the story got darker. The writer said they'd heard screaming one night coming from the main house and decided to investigate. I remember my heart sinking as I read. Every word felt too specific, too real. The description of the farm, the layout of the house, even the monthly reports the caretaker had to give. It was identical to my situation. It was like reading my own life on someone else's screen. The post was 2 years old. I couldn't get it out of my head, so I decided to find out who had written it. A friend of mine, someone who knew their way around the internet, managed to trace the old email behind the account. I wrote to the person, asking if what they'd written was true. It might sound strange, but 15 years ago, the internet was a very different place from what it is now. Days later, I got a short reply. It said, "It was just a story. Please don't contact me again." But the tone didn't sound dismissive. It sounded scared. That was enough to push me over the edge. The descriptions were too precise to be made up. And the part that haunted me most, the writer claimed they'd discovered something underground. A hidden basement, completely sealed off, where people were being kept. After that, I couldn't sleep properly. Every night I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was living on the same property. I found myself reading the story over and over again, noticing more details each time. Then, one weekend, the couple told me they'd be out of town for a few days, and I just knew that that was my chance. When their car disappeared down the long dirt road, I waited about an hour, then walked up to the main house. Obviously, the front door was locked tight. I was even prepared to make it look like a break-in, to stage an attempted robbery, just to prove how obsessive I'd become. The house was old, but unbelievably luxurious. There was no way a farm could be that profitable, or could it? And when I say luxury, I mean extreme luxury. I checked every room. The kitchen, the living room, their bedroom. Nothing seemed out of place. But I knew I was just stalling, avoiding what I really needed to do. Heading toward the kitchen, the area that led down below, to the basement where, supposedly, hell itself existed. I decided it had to be now or never. I went back to the kitchen and pushed open the door that led down to the basement, barely visible. I pulled it open, and a narrow staircase led down into the dark. The smell hit me halfway down. Something foul. Like rot mixed with rust. The air was damp and heavy. When I reached the bottom, I realized this wasn't a regular basement. The contrast with the rest of the house was staggering. An absolute shock. The walls were concrete, and the only light came from a single bulb hanging by a wire. The door had to be completely forced open, but I finally managed to get it. There were two men down there. They were crouched in the corner, both of them filthy and shaking. Their skin was grayish, their faces hollow. They looked like they hadn't eaten properly in weeks. They looked at me like they were staring at a monster, completely terrified. Neither of them spoke English. I kept saying, "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you," over and over, hoping they'd understand. After a few seconds, I pointed toward the stairs and stepped aside. They hesitated, then just bolted. I followed them up, and when we got outside, they ran through the fields, barefoot, straight toward the line of trees at the edge of the property. I could see the bruises on their backs, dark and deep. Before disappearing into the woods, they turned around and bowed, just slightly, like they were thanking me. That broke me. My legs gave out, and I remember sitting there in the dirt, shaking uncontrollably. I didn't understand what I'd just seen, but I knew I had to do something. I went back inside, desperate to find proof. Papers, photos, anything that would expose those monsters. But there was nothing. Every drawer, every cabinet was empty. It was like the house belonged to two completely normal people. Sweet, even. After that, everything happened way too fast. I was in what looked like an office, going through the drawers, when I heard the distant sound of a car and the front gate opening. They were back. I ran out the back door, through the fields. I didn't grab anything from my place, not even my ID. I knew they'd realize I'd been inside their house. I just kept running until I reached the main road and called a friend who lived a few towns away. He picked me up, and I stayed at his place that night. But around 4 in the morning, someone knocked on his door. 2 men. They said they were police officers. I actually felt relieved for a second. I thought maybe I could finally report what I'd found. But as soon as he opened the door, they forced their way in. They beat us both until everything went black. Before I lost consciousness, one of them leaned close to my ear and said, "If you talk, next time you won't get a warning." I have no idea how they found me there, but the truth is, they did. That was more than 15 years ago. Since then, I've changed my name twice. I've moved across different states, lived under the radar, always looking over my shoulder. I sent anonymous reports to the police years ago, but nothing ever came of it. From what I've heard, the farm's been abandoned for over a decade now. No one knows what happened to the couple. Maybe they packed up and moved their operations somewhere else. Maybe they were caught and silenced. Maybe they're still out there, living quietly, pretending to be just another elderly pair in the countryside. All I know is that I still see those men's faces when I close my eyes. Their hollow eyes, the bruises, the way they bowed before running into the woods. And I still wonder, every single night, if they ever made it out alive. My parents still own a cabin in the lower Appalachians, a few miles outside a town that barely exists anymore. When I was little, that area was full of families. People kept gardens, had bonfires, everyone knew each other. You could hear laughter from the lake on summer nights. Then, in 2002, 2 women were killed on the ridge. just a couple of miles from our place. The guy who did it was never caught. After that, people stopped coming. Houses were left empty. Within a few years, it felt like most of the hollow had just given up. We stopped going as much too. My parents tried to keep it up, but the roof started to sag. The road to the house washed out a little every winter, and there just wasn't any reason to go. By the time I left for college, it was basically sitting empty, except for the few times my dad went to check it after a storm. A few years later, they decided to rent it. Nobody wanted to live there, but eventually a couple from town agreed to take it. Their names were Leonard and Elsie. They were older, maybe late 60s. He was the type that always looked angry about something. Thin, pale, always wearing the same flannel jacket. People in town said he yelled at his wife a lot. My mom didn't like the idea, but my dad said beggars can't be choosers, and it was better to have someone paying rent than let the place rot. For a while, everything seemed fine. Leonard kept to himself. He fixed the fence, mowed the grass. The neighbors said they barely saw Elsie anymore. Then, out of nowhere, they moved out. Didn't leave a note or call. They just packed up and left. My parents figured he must have found somewhere cheaper closer to town. About a year after that, we all went back together. It was November, cold and gray. The kind of cold that seeps into everything. The plan was just to stay a few nights, check if the pipes had held through the last winter, and maybe decide whether to sell the place. My sister brought our cat, Willow. She was gentle, the kind of cat that made friends with everyone. My mom said she'd keep the place from feeling so empty. The first couple of days were normal. The house smelled musty, but familiar. We spent the day cleaning, went into town for supplies, that kind of thing. Then, on the third morning, we found Willow lying under the back steps, twitching, drooling. My mom started crying before anyone could even speak. My sister grabbed her and ran for the car. She drove faster than I've ever seen her drive in my life. The vet said it was rat poison. Said she'd have died within an hour if my sister hadn't gotten her there that fast. We didn't keep poison in the cabin. Never had. We didn't even have traps. The vet said the amount was deliberate and definitely not an accident. After that, things started feeling wrong. We noticed cigarette butts in the driveway that hadn't been there before. The motion light over the porch came on in the middle of the night even when there was no wind. Once, my dad found muddy boot prints by the side door. He said it was probably from the plumber who came by earlier in the year, but the prints looked fresh. A few nights later, something hit the side of the house. Not loud, just one hard thump, like a boot against the wall. When we checked outside, the porch light flicked on. The yard was empty, but I swear I could smell smoke, like someone had just been standing there. My mom didn't sleep at all that night. She kept checking the windows. The next morning, my dad found the basement door cracked open. It was locked from the inside when we'd arrived. He didn't say anything, but I could tell it rattled him. We cut the trip short. We packed up that afternoon. The morning we left, we noticed the lock on the back door was broken. It had been pried open. Inside, nothing was taken. but the air felt stale, colder somehow. My mom said it smelled like cigarettes again. A week later, the sheriff called. He said a neighbor had seen Leonard's old pickup parked near the end of our road at night. The man hadn't spoken to anyone, just sat there in the dark for hours. They tried to find him afterward, but the truck was gone. No record of where he went. My parents haven't been back since. The house still stands, but no one lives there. The porch light's probably still broken. Willow's still alive. She has a small scar on her side from where they had to treat her, but she's fine. I try not to think too much about that. I don't believe in curses or ghosts. But sometimes, when I picture that cabin, I see it how it looks now. Empty, half swallowed by trees, the road nearly gone. And I wonder if maybe Leonard never left the ridge.